Here is neuroscientist and Map Habit co-founder, Dr. Stuart Zola.
Hello again, everyone. It's Stuart Zola, and today we are going to be talking about a very interesting topic that many of us do, sometimes very often. Let me share my screen so we can get started on this. And, excuse me, we're ready to get started now. Excuse me, ma'am? Well, it looks like she is already well into our topic, because we're going to be talking today about naps are not just for babies. When we talk about napping, we're going to have to first talk a little bit about sleeping. Sleeping and napping really are a little bit different from each other, and we'll discuss those differences. But first, let's just talk about the stages of sleep, so we'll get a better sense of how sleeping and napping really are different from each other. When we talk about sleeping, this illustration shows about what happens to many of us during the night. So across this line, the horizontal line, are the sleep stages, the hours of sleep that we are in, different sleep stages as we go forward. So we begin in the waking state as we are getting into bed and settling down on our pillows, etc. And then we move into this little kind of green area, which is an almost awake time when we're just in that kind of twilight zone. And then we begin dreaming. I'm just going to look at one of these cycles here and follow it through. So we begin dreaming. We actually begin dreaming relatively quickly after we begin to fall asleep. And after we dream for a bit, we then go into a light stage of sleep. Let me just try and get this laser pointer on. There we go. We go into a light stage of sleep here. And then eventually we go into a much deeper stage of sleep. Now, this is where it's really often difficult to wake people up. And this is where often people have these kind of odd things about sleeping. They'll do sleepwalking or sleep talking and other kinds of things in this deeper stage of sleep. And indeed, the experience for people who are witnessing this happen to their partners or friends notice that it's difficult to get them to wake up. And then we float back up into light stage. We have some dreams again, and then we drift back down again. And we have these cycles, 3 or 4 or 5 of them during the course of the night, where we move from very light sleep into deeper stages of sleep. During the lighter region here, the dreaming region, this is often referred to as Rem sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. That's because if you open the eyes of an individual while they are asleep and dreaming, you can actually see their eyes moving around as if they're watching a movie screen, presumably because they are watching their dream. So different stages of sleep, these all have different functions. We've talked about this in other of our lectures, other of our webinars, and we'll talk about some of that again soon. But for now, the notion simply is to understand that we have these very different levels of sleep. We cycle through them during the night. They last in the range of an hour or so for these cycles, an hour and 20 minutes or so for these cycles, a little bit more for some people. And as I said, we go through 3 or 4 or 5 of these cycles, depending on how much sleep we're getting at night. Now, when we talk about sleeping versus napping, this little illustration, this table, shows some of the differences that are fundamental between the two. When we talk about sleep, we talk about sleep as a resting stage where the body is not active and the mind is unconscious. We aren't aware of our surroundings. When we talk about napping, we're really talking about a relatively short sleep period. This usually happens during the day as opposed to during the night. Now it's different, of course, for night workers. Their whole biology shifts, but we're talking now in terms of the activity for most of us who are in their regular 24-hour day-night cycles. For sleep, an individual requires about 6 to 8 hours of sleep. We can talk about that on a separate occasion, and we'll actually come to that just a little bit on the next slide. What is the amount of sleep we should get? We'll see, and some of you will be surprised, I think. But for napping, it isn't anything like 6 or 8 hours. It really is pretty short, and it should last not more than about 30 minutes. In fact, 30 minutes is getting to the border between a nap and a real sleep episode. And we'll see why that's not so good. So when we talk about naps, we really are talking about somewhere in the range of 20 minutes. Back to sleep side, when we're in sleep, there are several sleep cycles that occur during the night. We saw those in the previous illustration. When you're napping, it doesn't actually allow you to go through a complete sleep cycle. You may have some dreams, but you're not going to go into the deep stages of sleep. And we'll see why that's the case and why it's not very good for that to happen if you are trying to take a nap. And then finally, sleep stages include both REM, rapid eye movement sleep, your dream sleep, as well as non-REM sleep, the more deeper stages of sleep. But in a nap, it usually involves, it says here, non-REM sleep. It should really be, usually involves possibly REM sleep, but not very much in the deep stages of sleep, not non-REM sleep. There are other non-REM stages, and so it's correct in that sense, but not in the deep stages of sleep. Right? So just to reiterate then, sleep, long-term process, 6 to 8 hours, nap, short-term process, 20 minutes or so, not much longer than that. We have to consider napping because we don't get enough sleep. One of the reasons that napping has become such a popular kind of discussion now is because, particularly since the onset of the pandemic and the COVID era, people have not been getting sleep, good enough sleep as they had in the past. And so the question always is, what is the optimal level of sleep? Should I sleep 5 hours a night? Should I sleep 10 hours a night? Where should that be? Well, over here on the right-hand side, we have something that's referred to as the inverted U-shaped function. It's just this curve right here. It's a U stood upside down, essentially. And this inverted U-shaped function helps us in many ways to describe a lot of different phenomenon. It could be the amount of medication you take. It could be the amount of sleep that you've had. And that's what we're going to focus on. Here on the horizontal axis are simply the hours of sleep. And what we've done on this inverted U-shaped curve is to superimpose your ability to perform. It doesn't matter whether it's a cognitive task or some motor skill task or a reaction time task. What this inverted U-shaped curve tells us is that there's some optimal range, optimal level on this horizontal axis where you perform about the best. And if you move on either side of that, if you have less sleep, fewer hours of sleep here, your performance isn't as good as it is when you have the optimal level. And at the same time, you might suppose, well, if 7 or 8 or 9 hours is good, maybe 10 or 11 or 12 hours is good, but it turns out not to work that way. In fact, the more sleep you get beyond 7, 8, or 9 hours for most individuals, the more your performance begins to deteriorate. It actually becomes poorer with more sleep. So there is this optimal performance, and that's what this inverted U-shaped curve is showing us. And here is the optimal performance. For most people, it's somewhere in the range of 7, 8, 9 hours. Go beyond that, your performance begins to deteriorate. And if you don't have at least that, then your performance also deteriorates. Now, how do we know that? We know it from the kinds of studies that are done in what is called a sleep laboratory. Sleep laboratory is a very interesting environment. It's in a laboratory, just as it says, but individuals volunteer and they come and they sleep in the sleep laboratory. They have their regular day of activity, whether it's work or whatever else they're doing. And then they come and they sleep in the sleep laboratory. And while they are sleeping, or before they get to sleep, they are wired up with lots of electrodes that detect lots of activity, whether it's muscle movement, whether it's brain activity, whether it's reaction time and movement, it's your heart rate, your blood pressure. All kinds of measures are recorded while you are falling asleep and in the different stages of sleep that we talked about. In this particular study that we will just spend a few minutes on, individuals came into the sleep laboratory every day for 3 weeks, every night rather, for 3 weeks. For some individuals, they were allowed to sleep only 4 hours a night. After 4 hours, they were awakened and they had to stay awake for the rest of the time, then go to work, come back again, and they could get their 4 hours. For others, it was 6 hours a night, and for still others, it was 8 hours a night, a regular kind of average night's sleep. During the course of those 3 weeks, they were continually assessed in terms of their behavioral functions, their abilities. They tested cognition, they tested attention, they were tested on motor skills, reaction times. And the results were very interesting. If individuals were allowed to sleep only 4 or 6 hours, their performance steadily declined. If they were allowed to sleep 8 hours, their performance was up here at the optimal level. But otherwise, these other individuals, 4 to 6 hours, and look where 4 and 6 is, it's really outside this blue range, and their performance progressively deteriorated. In fact, those individuals who had a sleep debt of only being able to sleep for 6 hours, they were like individuals who hadn't slept for 2 full days in terms of their performance levels. So think about what that means for a moment in terms of some kinds of individuals' jobs. If you're a pilot, for example, and you have not had a good night's sleep, probably not a good idea for you to be flying. If you are just an average individual and you haven't slept well and you're about to leave on a long automobile trip, may not be such a good idea to do that trip, because you are not going to be at your optimal level of performance. And if you have to put on your brakes suddenly, you may have a reaction time that's a little bit slower, and that little bit of slowness in being able to put on the brakes, that could really mean have a very significant, unfortunate outcome. So be mindful of this idea of how important getting the right amount of sleep is. Now, there's one more finding here that is probably, to my mind, the most frightening of the findings of what happens when you don't sleep, other than that you have these declines. And that finding is that the participants were not aware of their steady decline. When you would ask the individuals who had only 4 hours or 6 hours of sleep, how do you think you're doing on all these tests every day? They would say, I think I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, I don't think I'm having any trouble with it. But their performance had really deteriorated. They were down here, not up here. And they were unaware of it. And so that's the really difficult and frightening piece of information. People are often unaware of the impact that having little sleep or not enough sleep has had. And that's why it becomes so important to understand the nature of sleep and why naps may be able to help for individuals who aren't getting enough sleep during the night for various reasons. All right, well, let's talk about different types of naps. It turns out we often hear the term power naps, but it turns out that not all naps are created equal. And we'll come to some of the details of these different naps. But one kind of nap is often referred to as a recovery nap. And this is when you actually have sleep deprivation. Sleep deprivation can leave you feeling tired, and the next day you need to compensate for that sleep loss. And so taking a short nap actually can have a very good impact on recovery of your cognitive abilities by just having that 20-minute nap if you have had some sleep deprivation. There's something else called an anticipatory nap. This is a technique that is used by lots of individuals who are night workers, for example. They can schedule a nap before they start their nighttime work so that they will be able to stay more alert at work. So you can think of it as a kind of preemptive strike against your not having sufficient sleep. A third type of nap is simply often referred to as an enjoyment nap. It's a nap you have no particular reason to it. It's not that you're trying to protect your ability or cognitive function. You are just napping because you kind of relax yourself and improve your mood and energy. And upon awakening, if you stick with this idea of a shorter nap, you will have better mood, more energy. We'll see some of those data coming up when you awake from a nap. So just doing a nap for pure enjoyment, essentially, can be a very important and effective thing. It doesn't have to be a reason to do it. And then finally, there are naps that are often referred to as essential. These are naps that really have kind of medical conditions associated with them. If you're sick or you may have a greater need for sleep in terms of recovery from illness. So naps taken during illness are considered really essential naps. They're things that almost would be prescribed to do because they are so restorative. So essential naps are an important kind of napping as well. Now, how long should you nap? We talked about that a couple of slides ago in terms of sleep. But the question is not the sleep cycle, the question is the nap cycle. Anytime we fall asleep, we begin to move through the series of sleep stages that we saw in the very first slide, from very light sleep to dreaming to very deep sleep. And researchers have found that 5-minute naps are probably too short. And when we talk about just getting a quick cat nap, 5-minute naps, 10-minute naps, probably not long enough to have much benefit. Sleeping for about 20 to 30 minutes, it seems, is the range that we should be thinking about that gives the body enough time for benefits. If you nap too much further beyond that, napping too long, beyond 30 minutes, or waking up from a deep sleep, it's the same thing. If you wake up from a deep sleep, you feel kind of groggy, you're a little bit disoriented, you actually go through a subsequent awake period of something that's referred to often as sleep inertia. You're just not really quite with it yet as a result of having been in that deep sleep. So you don't want to be waking up from a deep state of sleep. That's usually not what happens at night either. Remember, these cycles go down and then they come back up. And up here is when you wake up. You usually don't wake up when you're down in your deep sleep cycle. We said, in fact, it is hard to wake you up in your deep sleep cycle. So if you nap for a longer period of time, you are then liable to cycle into your deep sleep, and you may be more likely to wake up from a nap in deep sleep if you let it go too long. Not a good idea. So what's the answer then? The answer is something referred to as the Goldilocks Solution. If you look over here on the left, 5 minutes, too short. 90 minutes, too long. 20 to 30 minutes, just right. So the notion is too short is not going to do you much good. Too long is probably going to be not productive in terms of your cognitive abilities or any other aspects, your mood. But if you're in the range of about 20 minutes, not longer than 30 minutes, that is about optimal. That's going to get you into your light sleep phase, maybe a little bit of REM sleep, but not into your deep sleep phase. So when you wake up, you are going to be more alert, more refreshed than you would otherwise. So what are some of the things to keep in mind if you want to take the best nap? One is you actually ought to be thinking about setting an alarm. Now, I know we've talked about sleep before in other talks and talked about if you have to set an alarm when you go to bed in order to wake up in the morning, that probably means you're not getting enough sleep at night. And there could be variations on that thing. There could be important reasons that you have to set an alarm if you have to get up earlier than you might otherwise normally get up. But for naps, it's not unreasonable to actually set an alarm because you want to really keep that nap within that 20, 25-minute period, less than 30-minute period. So studies show that the optimal length of a nap is between 20 and 30 minutes, and it provides the most restorative sleep without the drowsiness effect. So that's what you want to shoot for, and it's not unreasonable to do it with an alarm, either on your watch or your iPhone or an alarm clock. You don't have to be sleeping in bed, remember now, for these naps. As you saw, our first woman in the picture was still very comfortably sleeping with her dog on the couch. A second thing to keep in mind for having the best impact of naps is to nap earlier in the day. Napping late in the day can affect your ability to fall asleep that night. And so you want to try to be somewhere halfway between your waking and sleeping times, if you wake up at 8 in the morning and you go to sleep at 10 at the night, you have about a 14-hour range there. And so 7 hours after about 8 o'clock in the morning, somewhere around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, not unreasonable to sleep, but not 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, because then it really starts to have an impact on your ability to continue your cycle of sleep at night. Having a sleep-friendly space is important. You do want to be comfortable, but you can fall asleep on a chair, fall asleep on a bed, on a couch. We've all been able to adapt to this at your desk, is often the case as well when people are working. If you have the ability to adjust your environment, it's good to have a dark, kind of cool and quiet space. If you're in an apartment or even an office, you can put a do not disturb sign on the door, so that 20 minutes becomes really very precious. If you get disrupted in that 20 minutes, then it doesn't have some impact, remember, because we know 5 or 10 minutes is probably not going to do it. So you really want to be able to have that 20-minute window uninterrupted, and you want to kind of create the most friendly space you can for being able to carry that out. And then finally, relax. Don't use this nap time to try to solve problems or ruminate on the sources of stress that are going to keep you awake during this precious interval for napping. So just let go of your to-do list. Just try relaxation, try mindfulness, try a little bit of music. All of those things focus on having you relax and getting you to sleep for those 20-minute periods, right? Now, we can talk about some of the benefits of sleep. We've talked about some of the strategies for sleep, but there are a lot of really real effects of being able to have these naps. Naps help you regulate emotions. They support our mental health. After a nap, people are less impulsive. Lots of studies to show these kinds of changes. People are less impulsive and they can deal better with frustration. Studies show that people who have napped have a lower blood pressure after going through some kind of mental stress testing that is intended to raise your pressure and stress you. If you've just doing that after a nap, you do better and you have less stress, less blood pressure, etc. There's good evidence that having these naps improves your memory. You do better on a memory test after the nap. It helps you to retain information. There was a study done just a couple of years ago showing that individuals who went through a 90-minute learning experience, some videos and discussions about crab species of crabs. One group napped for an hour after that. One group crammed. They studied the stuff over and over again. And one group watched an hour-long movie during that hour interval. And then they all took a crab test, and a week later, they took another crab test. It turned out that the nap group outperformed everyone on the second test. After the first test was done, there were some mixed results on the first test, but after some time passed, it turns out that the individuals who had the nap period had a chance to consolidate that information somehow in a better way than the other two groups. So that nap helped. Now, that nap was an hour-long nap. We don't have a lot of information about whether people actually slept during, how much during that 1 hour, how much did they sleep. We do know that some of it was preparatory to getting them to sleep. So they were probably in the range of somewhere in the range of 30 or 40 minutes, a little longer than we're saying, but not the 90 minutes of a sleep cycle. So it did have some benefits. It helps your immune system. Taking a nap actually helps to increase the release of these pro-inflammatory markers and causes some. Let me back up and just change that and say, sorry. So if you have sleep deprivation, it increases the release of these pro-inflammatory markers. When we say pro-inflammatory markers, these are just biologics that enhance and help increase inflammation, both in your brain and other regions of your body and muscles and other organs of your body. And so you don't want these pro-inflammatory markers to be increasing. And that happens if you are sleep deprived. So if we think about one of the earlier slides, when individuals are sleeping only 4 hours or 6 hours as opposed to 8 hours, those individuals had enhanced pro-inflammatory markers. They had more markers than they should have for healthy ability of your immune system. Once your immune system has to fight off inflammation, you're utilizing its resources. Counteracting this with napping during the day could potentially improve your immune system and your cellular function in general. So there's some evidence that naps have a positive impact on your immune system. I'm waffling a little bit on this one because I don't want to overstate the case. We do know a lot about pro-inflammatory markers, and we do know that sleep deprivation makes those worse. We have some evidence that napping actually makes them better. You reduce the amount of those pro-inflammatory markers with short bouts of sleep, namely naps. All right. There's also some evidence that it helps regulate amyloid plaques. Now, amyloid plaques, anybody recall what those are? Those are those abnormal deposits of protein in the brain of individuals diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. It's not entirely clear how these deposits of amyloid get there, and we do know something about their ability to disrupt neural function, and that's associated with the cognitive changes that we see in Alzheimer's disease. So sleep deprivation is common in Alzheimer's disease because people just don't sleep well because of a lot of different kinds of changes that are going on in the physiology of individuals with Alzheimer's disease. And so that could affect the accumulation of these amyloid plaques. It allows more of them to begin to accumulate. And they are a pathological marker in Alzheimer's disease. So controlling our sleep may help control these inflammatory conditions associated with the development of Alzheimer's disease. And napping could help bolster that control. Now, again, We don't have a lot of very strong evidence for this, but we know enough about the physiological effects of napping and the physiological effects of sleep deprivation to suppose that napping actually could in some ways counteract the negative effects of sleep deprivation. And then finally, there are good data, good studies that show that there is better cognition and attention. There's reduced levels of adenosine in the brain. Adenosine is a neurotransmitter that promotes sleep. The longer you are awake, the more adenosine accumulates in your brain to aim you towards sleep. So if you get this little nap, you actually have a much better cognitive function because your levels of adenosine have been reduced. So you're not so sleepy. You don't have as much problem paying attention and staying focused. So lots of benefits from napping. It's not trivial that we talk about napping and napping for the right amount of time, because all of these things matter. Napping too long, not good. Too short, not good. The Goldilocks effect, napping just right, has its best impact. There's some evidence that napping can even increase your happiness. So we know it does have effects on mood. Recently at the Edinburgh International Science Festival, it was found that people who nap for fewer than 30 minutes seem to enjoy an improved sense of well-being compared to individuals prior to their napping and compared to individuals who nap for longer periods of time. So those are the data collected from interviews with thousands of people. This is not a study that was done looking at happiness, but this is a study that was done asking people to rate their levels of happiness and asking them many other questions, one of which was, do they nap and how long do they nap for? The happiness benefit is limited, though. People napping more than 30 minutes report feeling less happy than people who do not nap. So even if you nap for a long time, that doesn't have as positive an impact as when you nap for the right amount of time. There are a number of individuals, very famous, very productive, wonderful leaders who napped all the time and who do nap. You're in outstanding company if you are a napper. Winston Churchill was a famous nap. He used to nap during the war. He would go into this particular region in London that was built during the war, these underground offices and protection. And he would go and take his 20-minute nap. Albert Einstein used to nap. Many people describe in their biographies and autobiographies their kinds of routines. And it turns out lots of people, Eleanor Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Margaret Thatcher, Benjamin Franklin, all of these individuals routinely napped during the day. They actually figured out that somehow these naps were important to their well-being, even though at that time they may have had no science to back that up. There's a cautionary note on napping. One is that we have to be careful because napping can really interfere with your ability to fall asleep in your regular sleep time. So people who have difficulty falling asleep at night, people who have insomnia, for example, may want to avoid daytime napping because that may make it even more difficult for them to fall asleep at night. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, and just to remind some people who are having difficulty falling asleep at night, is that it does no good for you to lie awake and ruminate about the day, ruminate about the challenges and problems on your to-do list and other kinds of things, because that is not going to get you to sleep. More likely, a kind of behavior might be simply to get up and read a book or listen to some music or do some other kind of relaxing thing. In some cases, people just find it relaxing and useful to work and to use their energy that way, and then get back to sleep. But people with insomnia have some real challenges, and we'll talk about some sleep disorders on another discussion at another time. There can be some adverse health effects associated with long midday naps, as we said. We don't want to do these long naps. There's some increased risk for diabetes and heart disease and depression. It may signal that nighttime sleep is of poor quality. People may have sleep apnea and not know it, by the way, or some other kind of sleep disorder. And so they're not getting a good night's sleep, and accordingly, they're taking naps during the day, but these naps are long naps. They're not the 20-minute naps that we've been talking about. And those naps, long naps, are associated then with these kinds of difficulties. So be mindful of those aspects. Sorry. Hold on one moment here. Yeah. So let's talk about another couple of other things before we end here. One is something referred to as other nappables. These are just other kinds of facts and considerations with respect to naps. One is to consider a coffee nap. Now, this is a very creative idea. And that is to have a cup of coffee just before you take your nap. You'll fall asleep because the coffee won't have its impact quite enough yet. And then when you wake up, you're going to be refreshed from your nap, and the caffeine is going to start to kick in for your productivity and focus and attention. So it's often referred to as a coffee nap, and there's some good data that suggests that this is not such a bad idea if you are going into some discussion or an exam or something after that little nap, that you kind of, in a sense, juice it up with a good dose of caffeine first. It's not going to prevent you from getting to your nap because it just won't have enough time to act that if you're ready and down for your nap. But it will come into place when you wake up, and it could help you to have even more productive post-nap activity. Some of us have teenage grandchildren, and the question is, should teens be taking naps? Teens who nap during the day tend to get less quality sleep at night. So napping for teens, probably not such a great idea. In fact, daytime napping could be ineffective for teens, and it might enhance their inability to get their nighttime sleep. Teens are teens. They're just active all the time. It's not, they're not the same brains as older individuals. So I wouldn't push napping for teenagers. They'll sleep when they want to sleep. Some people just don't sleep well during the day, and there's no harm in that. So don't try to force a nap. For some people who try napping, it just doesn't work. And that's probably fine. Shouldn't try to change that natural aspect of your sleep cycles. There is some evidence that the effects of naps improve when the person takes them regularly. So often when we're talking about the impact of naps, people may try it for a few days and they don't see it having much impact. But it turns out a few days is probably not long enough for us to be able to see and assess that impact, because naps have to become a habit. And it turns out that habits are so important for so many other aspects of behaviors, but habits are probably also very important for napping. So just doing a nap occasionally can be very good and refreshing, but the most positive effects from napping are seen when people do it routinely and it becomes truly a habit. Let me ask a series of quick questions now. What do you think? We've been through a lot here in the last 30 minutes or so. So here are some questions. You can just answer these to yourself. We'll come back during the Q&A, the question and answer period, in just a moment or two. And if people have questions about these, we can come back to those. Here's the first one. Is a 30-minute nap good for you? What do you think? Yes or no? Is it okay to take a 2-hour nap every day? What do you think? How late is too late to take a nap? Is taking a nap after lunch a bad idea? A good idea? What do you think? Is it good to take a nap after working out? I don't think we actually talked too much about that possibility, but think about what you may be able to reason out from what we have talked about so far. Is it good to take a nap before studying? And is it good to take a nap after studying? Now, could it be that taking a nap before studying has an impact and taking a nap after studying has an impact? Could those impacts be the same, or could they be opposite each other? And then finally, is it good to have a cup of coffee before a nap? I think we probably all know the answer to that one because that was the most recent thing that we talked about of these questions. So think about those, and we will now just say thank you for being with us. And I'm going to turn it back to the moderator and join you on the other side of that for live questions and answers. Look forward to hearing from you. Thanks so much.
Okay, everybody. Let me stop something over here real quick. All right. Welcome back, all. We had a little bit of interaction there in the chat during that little quiz. And I think a lot of people have their own answers in that regard. I am a big believer in napping. When I was a new parent, I had a special place set up in an extra room, and I was able to go and grab a nap periodically. And I think it made me a better partner in the care and feeding of our child, which is interesting. For some reason, I'm not hearing you, Stuart.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. I got you now.
Yep.
Yes. So yeah, as a new parent, I really looked into that. And about a decade ago, I started seeing napping apps. And I tried one called Paziz, and I was like a Kickstarter kind of person on that app. And so I'm a charter member. I get all the updates and everything. And it's actually a napping app. And I can recommend that one. If you have the paid version, you can decide whether you want the person kind of talking to you in the nap, or you just hear the tones and background noises and things. And then it will wake you as well. The music will begin to get more musical, complicated, add a beat to it, and you kind of come out of the nap naturally. And then I thought, wow, what if there was an app that you could get that tracked the moment that you went to sleep and then started your timer? And there is one, and it's called Sleep Cycle, and I use it periodically now because I always felt like, wow, when did I actually fall asleep? Would I set that 30-minute nap to do in 45 minutes? Does it take me 5 or 10 minutes to sleep? Anyway, this app tracks your breathing patterns, I think, mostly, and tells you when you're asleep. So that's called Sleep Cycle, and it's free. They have add-ons. You can have stars talk you into a nap. So some of your favorite stars might talk you into the nap. But the basic version, for what it is as a stopwatch, is really good. So anyway, I just wanted to add those 2 cents. If we have any actual questions, just let us know in the Q&A or the chat. I'm monitoring both. I've got a question here. Does napping during TV improve your bedtime sleep? Add to total bedtime sleep. What do you think, Stuart?
Yeah, hard question to know without knowing more details, but lots of people nap during TV. I mean, a nap, again, is a nap. It depends. TV can act just like your nap program. When people have things going on in the background, whether it's just voices or soft music or some program going on TV, people can nap through all of those things. In fact, they can induce naps. So the question is when that actually happens. If it happens during the daytime around midday or in the 3, 4 o'clock, but not beyond that, then presumably that's not going to have much negative impact on your sleep cycle. But as we talked about, the later in the day that you try to nap, if you are a regular sleeper, the later in the day that you nap, then the more impact those naps will have on potentially disrupting your sleep. So you want to always be careful of that. There are some programs that are on that people just naturally nap to, partly because sometimes the vocal part of it is so sleep inducing. Sometimes the program is just darn boring. So people fall asleep for various reasons. But in principle, the idea of whatever the mechanism, whether it's your sleep programs that you mentioned, Tom, or your nap programs, or TV, or just playing music, whatever helps you to get into that nap mode quickly, that's good, because you can get into the sleep phase that you want to be in without getting into the deep sleep phase. And the sooner you can get into those light sleep phases, the better your nap is going to be and the more effective it's going to be for you when you wake up. You're just going to wake up with a better mood, more alert, and feeling better.
There's a fifth nap that you didn't mention in the 4 nap diagram slide, and that is the disco nap. What we used to call the disco nap was, I'm going out, so I better grab a nap on a Saturday afternoon because so I don't poop out too late and I get kicked out of the bar at 2 o'clock in the morning or whenever it closed. My son
that was
does
kind of the anticipatory nap. We did have the anticipatory nap on there, so that's for the late night workers and things like that. But that's the same principle, at least.
Yes, exactly.
Disco,
I know my son
You're really
does
showing your age, man, with saying talking about disco. People here.
We still call them disco naps. Kids still call them disco naps. Thomas, who does not play disco, if he has a gig like in San Francisco, he's a musician, my son, and we're up in Oakland or something, about an hour and a half away. He wants to be. For him, it has way more to do with being alert on the road on the way home.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And so he will take a disco nap on those days, but also he is one of those guys, as you know, Stuart, you've kicked off a lot of webinars with him in the morning on East Coast time, and he's on the West Coast, and he gets up at about 5. And then he's a successful napper like his father. So that's a good thing to have inherited. I think in that case, I've always been a great napper. He and I napped together to a lot of nature shows when he was a little guy.
Okay.
And so, yep, always, I don't know if there are any new parents on here, but always take a nap when your child is napping. Pretty much no matter what else is going on, you can do that while your child is up and active.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Good
So
advice.
sleep is precious. And I will add that I've done enough enough sleep webinars with medical professionals that the thought of postpartum depression, a big amount of that is because mothers are typically so sleep deprived that depression would happen in a person who got that kind of sleep, no matter what. It is actually equivalent to a war zone sleep pattern, if you can believe that. So
Yeah, well, as we saw, even in the kind of sleep laboratory studies, just being deprived of sleep deteriorates your performance dramatically on all kinds of activities, whether it
Yes.
is reaction time or more complex kinds of cognitive and attention tasks. So we know that sleep deprivation is a really harsh enemy.
Yes, absolutely. All right, any other questions from anybody? This is kind of the last call for those questions. And the two sleep apps that I used were Paziz, and if you just look up sleep apps, and Sleep Cycle. They're both have a free version that are a little bit limiting, but definitely usable if you're into that sort of thing. I'm a gadget guy. I love how technology can help us. So I always dive in feet first on things like that. Right now, I don't think there are any more questions.
Right.
I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there.
Well, thanks everyone, and we'll see you again next month.
Excellent. Thank you for joining, and thank you for a great topic once again.